Welcome, everybody. I'm Judy Ribnick, Director of CBST Aging Together, and I'm delighted to see you and hope that you really enjoy tonight's program. The program is presented tonight to you by CBST's Aging Together and is made possible in part by grants from UGA Federation of New York, the New York City Council, the Leonard Litz Foundation, and supporters like you. If you'd like to support CBST's work with older people, with older adults, and people of all ages, you can go to cbst.org/donate. Thanks to everyone who's already been helping to make Aging Together empower people of all ages, especially 55 and older, to foster diverse, meaningful relationships, access and share important resources, and think strategically about the future. Aging Together is for everyone, partnered, single, with or without children, local or not, because whatever our situation, we are all aging together. On to tonight's presentation, Good Apologies. They aren't just for the high holidays, with CBST Senior Rabbi Jason Klein and congregant Marjorie Engel. We chose the book, Getting to Sorry, The Art of Apology at Work and at Home, because it focuses on one aspect of this yontif work of tshuva, of returning, of bettering our relationships with a higher power in the world, with ourselves and with each other, and trying to set things right. The book delves into why good apologies are essential, powerful, and restorative. Getting to sorry can be a good tool to help us in the work of tshuva, and it comes with a bonus. It's good all year round. It has a lot of practical action steps. It's very readable. It has a lot of humor in it, and a lot of things to help us navigate the world of apologies and fashion a world that we'd all like to live in. It has a vision not only of just one-to-one, but how can we be in the world with ourselves and with others that creates a world more filled with chesed, of kindness and goodness in the world. So the CBST program has benefited these last 3-4 years from a generous grant from United Jewish Federation of New York that's enabled us not only to have expert speakers come on from month to month, but also we asked them to put some money in so that we could buy books and help to enrich our own personal libraries. I'm pleased now to welcome our guests, CBST Senior Rabbi Jason Klein and congregant and co-author Marjorie Engel, to talk with us about apologies through the lens of Jewish thought and Jewish text, and Getting to Sorry's 6.5-step formula. Just a few words about both Rabbi Klein and Marjorie Engel, and I think Jason's going to put this in the chat as well. Rabbi Jason Klein, they joined CBST as senior rabbi in July of this year. He brings a wealth of experience and dedication to his role as a spiritual leader, an educator, an advocate for social justice. Rabbi Klein is a passionate advocate of social justice with a particular focus on LGBTQ+ rights and interfaith collaboration. As the first openly gay president of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical Association, he has championed diversity and accessibility within Jewish communities nationwide. With a diverse rabbinic background spanning various congregational and educational settings, Rabbi Klein is committed to enriching Jewish communities and fostering meaningful connections among their members. And his presence tonight, this evening, is a demonstration of Rabbi Klein's desire to help foster these kinds of connections at CBST. Thank you, Rabbi Klein. And Marjorie Engel is a CBST member. She's the co-author of Getting to Sorry, The Art of Apology at Work and at Home, and the author of Mamala Knows Best. She's been a columnist for both the Forward and Tablet, and a contributing editor to Glamour and Self. A frequent contributor to the New York Times Book Review, she's also written for Newsweek, Town and Country, Ms., Elle, New York Magazine, and many other publications. And back in the day, she was senior writer at the late lamented Sassy magazine. So I'd like to welcome you both, and off we go. Rabbi Klein, I'll leave it in your hands first.
Thanks, Judy. That was very, very generous introduction. I do have to give props to Tova Spitzer, who was the first openly gay person. As the RA president, I was the first openly gay man. She was the first openly gay person and woman. Marjorie, it is such an honor to have you here. I know we got to have a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and I think for me, getting to talk to you about your work and making my way through the book has been an awesome experience for this season. And I think, I think when CBST talks about Lair House and opportunities for people to do reflection in this season and in all sorts of modalities, the idea of just speaking personally, reading something in real time and noticing how in real time it's affecting the ways in which I relate to people. And I'm like going back and saying, just sent that text message apologizing for this. Did I, am I at the standard? I've really been loving that. So first of all, I think I just wanted to say, personally, it's awesome to have you here. And I'm really excited about us being able to have a little conversation, and mostly for the community to be able to learn from you, because I think that both in the accessibility and thoughtfulness and good humor of this book, there's what to learn for this season.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. And I'm so excited that you've joined our community, and I'm excited to get to know you. And, as people who have done time in Rhode Island, I'm very excited that we share that background. So, yeah, let's get into it.
Great. Well, perhaps I could start with just a few of my own
Please, yeah.
So look, I think one of the conversations that comes up at this season often is, what is the process of teshuvah about from a Jewish perspective? What is turning around? What is repentance? What is atonement? And here, I think, of course, in the way we titled this program, there's a clear overlap in what you're talking about. And I think there are also ways in which perhaps some of the things that we're used to from the tradition also diverges a bit. And I think when I think about Maimonides teaching us steps of teshuvah, of having moments of regret, of having confessions, of not repeating something again, there's a lot of power there. And I think for me, there's a lot of there feels like a lot of overlap in your methodology, that the pieces of apology with authenticity, not the I'm sorry even though I don't know what I did wrong thing, or the horrible United Airlines behavior, and even maybe more horrible public response to injuring a passenger, the sort of the PR over content kind of piece. But I think the part that I was most intrigued by jumping in our conversation is the idea that apologies are mandatory and forgiveness is not. And it's a compelling story for the season that we often think about as a season of forgiveness. So maybe we could start a little bit there. And I know in the room we have people who have read the book, people who are reading the book, people who haven't opened the book yet. So I hope this will also be an exciting place to start.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that so many people like to talk about self-forgiveness and forgiveness. It feels like apologies are something that it's easier for us to control, that there are steps that we can make ourselves take to apologize well. I feel like so often Judaism is a religion about doing, about being there, about community, and apologies are about what we present to other people. Forgiveness is a very internal act. And I feel like sometimes we can be really hard on ourselves when we can't do it, but sometimes there are also good reasons not to forgive. So, and sometimes I think you and I talked about the term spiritual bypassing, which is when other people are sort of encouraging you to skip the work. All of this is making me uncomfortable. Why don't you just forgive? Why can't you do this? And it's really more about, it's not about doing the important steps to actually, feel better. It's about making other people feel better by not holding grudges. And sometimes we are entitled not to forgive. But if we've done wrong, I think we have to apologize. And it's a hugely brave, it's terrifying to apologize and to apologize well. We all recognize the terrible apologies in social media, in politics, among celebrities. And yet when we're the ones who are on the hook to do it, somehow we find ourselves slipping into passive voice and excuses, because we're hardwired to be self-protective. I mean, the book goes into sort of why it's so psychologically hard to apologize. And it's easy to blame other people for apologizing badly. But when you're there, somehow that sorry if, sorry but, sorry you start coming out of your face. And I hear myself doing it, and I wrote the damn book,
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, so two groups of people. I'm glad you jumped into spiritual bypassing, because I think I think when we talked about that term, I told you the story of a friend years ago who had been wronged by someone, and 6 months later, the person called her on Yom Kippur and said, "I need to ask your forgiveness for such and such," and her response was, "My emotions do not follow a liturgical calendar." And I think in retrospect, I didn't have the term when I think it was 1995 when this person described this to me, to say spiritual bypassing. And I think it's such a great framing of, I'm looking in the book now, coined by John Wellwood, psychotherapist. So props to John Wellwood that you credit here. There are two groups of people that I think you come back to a few times in the book, probably others too, but the two that I noticed the most were children and doctors. And it feels like there's a lot that we can learn from children and also teach children. And then a lot we can learn from doctors, maybe more that we have to teach doctors, so they have what not to do historically. But it also sounds like there might be some progress here, and perhaps it would be playful and interesting just to reflect on Mr. Group.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think we've all, or almost all of us, have been on the receiving end of a crap apology from a doctor. We regret, the mistakes were made kind of apology. And some of that is from this doctors being afraid of lawsuits, and a history of doctors being told never to take responsibility. But there was a really important report written by the Harvard Hospital System in 2006, looking at the research and showing that there really is little evidence that good apologies, which mean apologies that say what happened, say the steps that we're taking to make sure this doesn't happen again, and say we are sorry, not we regret. Regret is about the feelings of the speaker, and apologies are about the feelings of the listener. So when people get a good apology, they are not more likely to sue. And in fact, bad apologies, those weasel apologies, make people more likely to sue. And that same report quoted a malpractice lawyer who says that he thinks that 2/3 of malpractice suits are due to failure to take responsibility, apologize, and communicate openly. And there is a researcher named Jennifer Robinault who's a doctor who writes like a real person, which is always lovely. But she says that what patients want is apology, explanation, and for their pain to mean something, for this not to happen to someone else. And if they get that, they are way less vindictive. And in fact, there are other Scandinavian countries where where med students are taught how to apologize in medical school. And the procedure is to offer an apology in the room after an error and offer money in the room. And it's a small amount of money. And yes, you can argue that other countries aren't as litigious as we are. But I love this idea of, we know that you had something terrible happen to you, and we want to fix it. And that is so rare in this system here. And when you talk about kids, we have a whole chapter called Sorry I Chased You with a Booger, which is a quote from an actual excellent apology from a child. I realize I should have brought that to share because I actually have the card where the kid said, Dear Ciara, I'm sorry I chased you with a booger. Here is a booger. And it was placed on the thing and circled so Ciara could find it. You can chase me now. And then I forget, it was something like, I won't do it again. Love, Riley. Excellent apology, takes responsibility, offers a way to make amends. All people should apologize that well. So yeah, but a lot of us aren't taught to apologize well as children. We aren't taught why it's important, and we don't see our parents apologize to each other. I know my brother is in the room here, and we grew up with a dad who yelled, and we often did not see the resolution after the yelling. He was amazing, but there was not always it's important for you to model I'm sorry for your kids, and we don't all do that.
Thanks. Andrew, Marjorie, my parents are in the room, so we can, do a little play.
Yeah, let's
Family
all
play if
play.
we want. But I do remember at some point the lesson of being told to apologize, I think by my father to my mother. And I kind of did one of these, I'm sorry for doing nothing. Like, and like, like the non-apology apology. It probably
Right.
literally said something like that.
Right.
Probably there have been other times where I said worse or whatever, but I think but I was called out on that immediately, and I think in retrospect I appreciated that. There was something you said before that struck me about when you talked about patients wanting an apology and explanation, their pain meaning something, and then I think you said that they were less likely to be vindictive. I almost want to reclaim that and turn it around and say, in spite of the stereotypes of our litigious society, maybe that's not vindictive. Maybe that's just being seen.
You're right. I used that was a poor word choice on my,
it's okay. I just
which
kind of
I
wanted
apologize. But people always talk about, people are, first of all, there's a big difference between public apologies and private apologies. And people are always asking my co-author Susan McCarthy and I to comment on celebrity and political apologies. And our, personal response is always, oh my God, we can do so much better than the people who are purported to be our role models, because they're protecting brands, they're protecting companies, they're protecting their reelection chances, and we're trying to protect just our human relationships. And I think that that's so important. And we're often holding up the wrong people as role models anyway, but yeah, I think that actually, can I read this little bit from people always talk about they're terrified to apologize because it'll just prolong the agony, and because if you apologize badly it'll go viral. But good apologies go viral too, because people want these happy stories as well as these horrible stories. So here's I'm just going to launch it, and you can stop me at any time if that's okay. In 2000, this is called A Bully's Apology Out of the Blue. In 2015, Chad Michael Morissette was minding his business, brand consultancy and visual design in West Hollywood, when he got a surprising Facebook message. It was from someone who'd once been part of making his life a living hell. Quote, "Hey, Chad, I was recently talking with my 10-year-old daughter about bullies. She asked me if I ever bullied anyone, and sadly, I had to say yes. What came to mind was how shitty and mean I was to you when we were in junior high. I want to apologize. If we lived in the same state, I'd apologize to your face. I don't even know if you remember, but I do, and I am sorry." End quote. Morissette was shocked. He both did and didn't know what the writer, Louis Amundsen, was talking about. Morissette had grown up in a small Alaskan town where he was constantly bullied in junior high school. quote, the entire football team bullied me. It wasn't one guy, it was 6 or 7 guys who followed me in the hallways, harassing me, insulting me, threatening my life, he said. There were times I'd walk down the hallway and groups of guys would follow me, threaten me, humiliate me, push me. He said, I was bullied for being gay. I was bullied for being little. It got so bad, he noted, I couldn't even walk to class without an adult escort. So he knew what Amundsen was talking about, but couldn't remember which tormentor he was or which shitty, mean things he'd said. Morissette had left that town at 15 and never looked back. For some reason. The Facebook message shook him up. He didn't answer for a few days. Then he replied, I'm quite moved by this. Thank you, and I accept your apology. In 20 years, you're the only person to apologize for being a bully to me when we were younger. I hope you can proudly tell your daughter that you have also apologized for it and that we're good. It's amazing what 20 years in children can do to us, no? Thank you again, and I hope you stand up to bullying anytime you see it. Have a great day. The answer, thank you. Your forgiveness means more to me than you know, and I hope I'm not the last to ask for forgiveness from you. Cheers. The exchange caught people's attention, and various outlets interviewed both guys. Amundsen said his daughter was working on a student council skit about bullying. Asking him various questions on the topic, she finally asked if he'd ever bullied anyone. I had to think about it for a minute, and that's the first time I'd thought about it in 20 plus years. And I answered honestly, and I said, yes, he said. Afterward, he concluded it was his duty to try to apologize. You can't change your past, but you do still own it. I can't take back the names I called him, the threats I made toward him, but I can apologize. It doesn't excuse my behavior as a child in any way, but as an adult, it's the best I can do to try to make it up to him. I really didn't expect him to respond at all, and I figured if he did, it would be telling me where to stick that apology, kind of too little, too late. But Morissette said it's never too late. A simple, quote, a simple I'm sorry can change everything, he said. And Amundsen's apology was excellent. He said he was sorry and what he was sorry for without repeating the ancient insults. He didn't make excuses. He didn't say, for instance, I was just a child myself. The apology and its acceptance empowered them both. The story was gripping to many people. Most people haven't been tormented that badly in high school, but many were bullied or ostracized or treated unfairly and never got an apology for anyone. Kids who bully are experimenting with power, as are adults who bully, but they should have grown out of that. Some parties feel they're powerful because they deserve to be. Others feel they lack power because those who do have power are hoarding it. People who are in charge rarely feel they shouldn't be. Societally speaking, the way power shifts is often through a revolution, a war, a conquest, an uprising. Power shifts are rarely polite. Questions of who has power are perpetually relevant, but every generation seems to think it's wrestling with conflicting ideas about power for the first time. Apologies are about power too. To apologize well is to give some of your own power away. As Tolstoy might put it, people who don't want to apologize are all alike. People who feel they're owed apologies are each pissed off in their own way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You. So you want to get into it? I mean, we've been talking about 6.5 steps, and
Yeah, we could go through them.
yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. Okay. So Susan, my co-author, and I are both science writers, health writers. I'm a health writer and she's a science writer. And we went through so much research in so many different fields because business people study apologies, legal analysts study apologies, medical people study apologies, psychologists and sociologists study apologies. So we sort of went through all of these different fields and sort of culled what we thought were the most important points. Also, everybody who writes about apology owes a great debt of gratitude to a psychiatrist named Aaron Lazar, who wrote a book years and years ago called On Apology. That was sort of a personal meditation. It's this tiny, slim book, but it's so suffused with Jewish wisdom. And he influenced our thinking a lot, as did the psychologist Harriet Lerner. Anyway, number one, use the words I'm sorry or I apologize. You'd be surprised. People don't tend to do that. Oh, other Jason, thank you so much for putting that up. So number one, say you're sorry. Number two, name the thing that you did. People tend to go, the situation, what happened last Tuesday, that thing. Nope, you got to say it. Words have power. Number three, show why what you did was hurtful. which means you don't go, I hate myself, I feel so bad, that was so out of character for me, that was so, no. How did it affect the other person? Number 4, be really careful with this one. Offer explanation if it's relevant. You know, this happened right before, but do not make excuses. Number 5, make it clear the steps that you are taking to make sure that the bad thing doesn't happen again. Number 6, if possible, make reparations, which may just mean like paying for the dry cleaning if you spilled something. It could be something a lot more meaningful, like a big donation to a charity in the person's name. And the most important and perhaps most difficult, half a step, which is let the other person have their say. Cynthia France, who's a psychologist at Oberlin College, talks about the timing of apologies and studies that. And she talks about how you have to let the other person sit with their anger and express their distress to you. Because if you don't give them time to do that, and we see that with public apologies, that when people rush in, they clearly haven't processed. They're just trying to paper things over. They're doing that spiritual bypassing. They're trying to make the ugly thing go away so it doesn't affect them. Both of you, the apologizer and the apologizee, should have the opportunity to sit with the thing.
Do these, in your experience, do these, in terms of the timing, do these 6.5 steps necessarily happen in one sitting, or in the ways in which sometimes when you talk about someone accepting an apology, that they might come back and say, actually, I'm not sure you really get why I'm hurt here. I want to explain it to you more. How
Yeah,
often
I think
situations where kind of you get to step 1, 2, 3, and then somebody said, I mean, it sounds like it's possible for someone to say, actually, like, thanks for sharing that. I think I need to internalize this more.
Yes.
And I hope I can come back to you in a little while.
Exactly. You can say it's always okay if you're on the receiving end. It's always okay for you to say, you know what? I'm not ready for this. I may never be ready for this. I appreciate you coming to me, but I need time.
So I was actually suggesting that it could be on the giving end too. Like if somebody on the receiving end starts to explain something that maybe the apologizer didn't even get.
Sometimes you do get the reason, the importance of the step 2 one, say why it was bad, is the person may say to you, that's not even why I'm so angry. So that is a great opportunity for the two of you to process together. And if the person says that, I think it's often a sign that they are willing to do the work with you, because if someone doesn't want to hear from you, which is always a painful thing, is if you feel bad for a thing you did and the other person doesn't want to talk to you. Maimonides says you have to try 3 times. But Maimonides says that after the 3rd time, it's like, I'm rubber, you're glue, and it bounces back and it's on them. But I don't necessarily think that's always true, because you might have done something so hurtful, even if it was unintentional, or it may have triggered something for them that may have nothing to do with you. That means that they just do not want to go there with you, and you have to sit with that. And that kind of sucks. But what you do get is the knowledge that you tried in that case, and that can be all you get.
Some of us were looking at that text last week on Tuesday, and noticed that there is a part where Maimonides also says, unless it's your teacher, in which case you should try 1,000 times. Like, don't even stop.
Yes.
Over, which is interesting. I mean, one teacher on the call said, started to kind of talk a little bit about what that meant from her perspective, and then I was sort of playing with the idea of, if we all have what to learn from each other, is there also a lesson in that too? That it's not just the rubber and glue, and we're
I want to note that I just saw what Michelle Zelkin said in the chat, is that my thought is that one needs to amend behavior and not do the same thing again after apologizing. And that is exactly what Maimonides says also, is that the person who apologizes without thinking about how they're not going to do the sin again is like a person walking into a mikvah holding a dead reptile. And obviously you're not going to be purified while you're holding a dead reptile. And Susan and I, when we listen to somebody either apologizing badly or saying things that indicate to us that they have learned nothing, Susan and I just look at each other and go, drop the reptile.
All right, so I love that image too. And so two like macro questions. I know, Judy, I imagine you're paying attention to time, so you can make sure we open this up to questions for everyone when the time is right. But one thing I was hoping you could reflect on is guilt, because I know you've talked about that.
Yeah.
And also defined it differently. And then the other piece is we just started Elul, and there's this season, and clearly, as we named in the program, these aren't just for the season of the Yamim Noraim. But as my colleague Rabbi Tobias Moss once said, some people thrive on a deadline, and I wonder, like,
Relatable.
if you could kind of reflect on that in terms of how to take advantage of Jews as this season without getting into that spiritual bypassing modality.
Yeah. A thing that I love the Vidui. I love ritual in general. I was a folklore and mythology major in college, and I love this, and I love the chanting all together. And we say these. I love an acrostic. I love what is that? Is that the word I'm looking for?
Yeah, like
the
alphabetical acrostic. Yeah,
alphabetical thing. Love it. But I didn't do all those things that I'm hitting my breast about. I did some of them. But I feel like there's something so powerful, and maybe it enters us on this primal level, that every year we are with a group of people who are acknowledging together that we screwed up. And again, when we look at the research that comes from the business school people, they talk about workplaces that are the most functional workplaces are the workplaces where people can admit to making mistakes, where it's not a completely cover your ass culture, where you're not spending all this time worried about, if I make a mistake, what's going to happen to me? Who's going to get punished? How am I going to cover this up? It's one where we know that I can admit I screwed up, and we're going to work together to fix the problem. And those are considered like safe workspaces. And I think that when we are in a culture that is a we culture, it helps us on the me level. And maybe the fact that we know and we see ourselves every year doing this together work of wanting to do better, that maybe primes the pump a little bit to help us. Because I hate those, and you referred to them earlier, the sort of the, if I did anything this year to make you, shut up. I don't want that. I want a meaningful, hey, if you're going to apologize to me, like, yeah, it's a fun little ritual to say to each other, as a way to say, hey, I love you, to say, to say to your close people, hey, if there's anything I did this year, that's nice. But often a lot of us can think of something specific that feels yucky, that we would like to apologize for. And there was a sort of turn of the century Lithuanian psychologist named Bluma Zeigarnik, who the Zeigarnik effect is named after her. And it's what she noticed when she was like in her cafe society with all of her friends drinking their schlogged beverages, that the waiters could remember everything every table ordered until they paid. And then when they paid, the waiters could no longer remember. And from that, she extrapolated that completed acts are more easily forgotten than incomplete acts. So apologizing is a completed act. You did the thing, and you can forget this thing, or at least put aside this thing that weighs on you. And that's a beautiful thing that we have the opportunity to do every year in Elul. But why not do it all the time? Because
what's up when people say things like, I'm going to forgive but not forget?
I think that, it's funny when people say that out loud, it tends to be slightly terrifying, the way you said it also.
Yes, agreed.
But we don't have to forget. you know, we also have this website, Sorry Watch, which started, Susan and I, which sort of started as kind of a joke about making fun of bad public apologies and actually became a really serious project that became the book. But we interviewed a kintsugi artist, a Japanese artist who fixes things, you know, fixes broken pottery with gold and glue. And you see the fractures. You don't forget that the beautiful piece of pottery was fractured, but you've turned it into something else that's beautiful and different and new. The seams show, but they're now a feature. And by the way, the item is now stronger than it was before it was broken. And you can see apology as a beautiful, similar metaphor. You don't have to forget, but it can be healing even. In fact, it's probably better if you don't forget, because you know that you overcame. You know that both of you, one of you or the other of you screwed up, and one of you or the other of you was strong enough and brave enough to apologize and to accept an apology.
I think
Oh,
you just
Clove, thank you for sharing that.
I was gonna say, oh yeah, I think you just helped explain why sometimes I've found that in personal relationships, when I've introduced like two friends from different parts of my life, and somebody say, "Oh, how do you?" Well, sometimes when it's someone that there's been, winding roads and ripples and twists and turns that have included us becoming alienated from each other and reconnecting, that I'll actually say it in the like right up, oh, well, we were colleagues in this context, and we had this falling out about this, but then we can, I apologize for this, and we worked through that. Like
It's amazing, right?
yeah, I mean,
It's
to kind of
beautiful.
acknowledge it feels very, very powerful, and that both people can sort of be in it in a way together.
It makes me so sad when politicians act like apologizing is cowardly or a sign of weakness, when it is so evidently a sign of strength when you do it right.
Mm, mm. Judy, how are we doing for time here? I know you want to.
We're good for time. We have questions coming through, and I think that will lead to more questions and conversation, if that's okay with both of you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one that's jumping out at me first here is what Ruth put into the chat, which was, and then if you don't mind, Judy, if I can take that liberty, then maybe you can moderate us to the others. What if there are mutual wrongs? Don't you have to process your own forgiveness before you can apologize? What if the other person is not willing to apologize? I have some opinions on this too, but I want to.
I do too. Let me first.
Yeah,
so I had to apologize. There are often mutual wrongs, but that is a separate conversation. And my friend and I we did have a conversation later about sometimes our kids didn't have the greatest dynamic together, but that is not what belonged in my apology. It can't be, but you. Can we, I feel bad that I made the card and we didn't share it, but there's all these words that don't belong in an apology, many of which are mitigating, bouncing, excusing. Jason,
yeah,
can
sure.
you?
Why don't we show that bingo card? Yeah,
Yeah, so there's like 7 bingo cards in the book with words that don't belong in an apology, which is just a way to lighten what can be a very heavy topic. So all of these things are, the minute you hear these words, you're like, no. Right? I can read it out loud. Disheartened, not what I meant, saddened, my intent. Let's move forward. Only the person who has been wronged gets to decide when it's time to, quote, look ahead or move forward. Asking for forgiveness. You don't get to ask for forgiveness is a gift, and you don't get to ask for a gift. Just like when you get married, it's rude to be like, we always hear these stories about people saying it's $100 to, no. This is not who I am. You can say this is not who I want to be. This is not, my best self, but you did it. It's who you are. The notion of negativity, like somehow that is bouncing it back to the other person. Somebody who says an offensive joke somehow always has a Black, Jewish, Asian, female, gay, or trans friend who wasn't upset. So there are like a bunch of these, and sometimes they're themed per chapter. So you might enjoy that when you're feeling stressed out by some of the rest of the subjects of this book.
Yeah, these are great. And so, yeah, so helpful.
Yeah, anyway.
I thought, too. No, yeah, I mean, it sounds like, I think I was going to say, I mean, that's a very powerful story that we also don't necessarily have to include in the recording if you don't want us to either, but,
Oh, nice.
but no, I just in terms of respecting the kids, but, or we can, whatever makes sense to you,
Yeah, I
but.
would love it if we could cut it, but I feel like I always come back to it because it's the story I knew when I needed to apologize. And I felt awful. There've been you know, yeah, we all screw up. It's a condition of being human.
Right, and that's a great example. No, I think that hearing the power piece in terms of adult child in that too is seems real, and I think there's there's some overlaps, I think, in reading the book for me around around certain like DEI work around
Yes,
the idea of
yes. There
criticism, gift, and not to maybe what Robin DiAngelo in White Fragility calls sort of white women crying, that turns the conversation into the person with the power, on the person with the power, as opposed to actually centering uh a person of color's experience, like, in that.
and it can be hard to acknowledge that there are different concentric overlapping and not overlapping circles of power, that in some, for us, for white Jews, it can be really complicated to acknowledge that, we both have power and don't have power. For people who are cisgender, it can be hard to acknowledge that you still have certain privileges that other people who may not share, your background may not have. And a lot of times when we're called out, our back goes up and we go, that can't be me because I'm a minority. And it can be hard to acknowledge that there are different levels and different kinds of privilege. And another thing, Loretta Ross talks at Smith College, talks about the importance of calling people in rather than calling people out. And when you, say, I know you're a kind person, and what you said, I don't think came off the way you intended it to, because I know you are a good person, and that was not a good thing to say. And can we talk about it? Like, that's a way to call someone in, as opposed to saying you're racist, you're sexist, you're homophobic, you're transphobic.
Yeah, and I think the way you said before about the difference between that's not the person I am versus that's not the person who I want to be is a subtle but significant difference. We talked, a few of us also last week, Rabbi Moskowitz and I were chatting last week, and I'll turn us back to other questions. And we were talking about the idea that the apology process might start happening, or let's say teshuva process might happen a millisecond after the wrong. And this example that he gave was the idea that when Sarah, in her old age, the biblical Sarah, finds out she's going to conceive, she laughs, and then quite immediately thereafter says, I didn't laugh. and Rabbi Moskowitz suggests that maybe that's her saying, already starting to have this change of heart, like, that's not the person I want to be. Now, maybe to some degree, it's also her saying that's not who I am. But maybe there's a way in which we can be kind to ourselves in those moments where we find ourselves getting defensive, to then take that apart and say, wait a minute, okay.
I love that story, because
I did that, but now who do I want to
in
be?
our very most, ancient texts, we're already, we're defensive, we're covering up, because it's just human nature. And if we understand that we're all prone to doing this, maybe we'll be kinder both to ourselves and to other people. And I just love this notion that, rather than immediately looking for, I hate the word cancel because it means something different to everybody. And I don't think that many people actually are permanently canceled. It's a way to say I'm being silenced. It's a way to be aggrieved. But when we're unwilling to forgive someone, if we're unwilling to educate someone, we're losing an opportunity for ourselves. And we're also building a world that we ourselves wouldn't want to live in. You want somebody to show you that kind of, if you'll excuse the Goyish phrase, show you that kind of grace.
We've got some grace too. We just maybe use
You get
other.
grace? Okay. good.
Dan, Tana, yeah. Judy, you're paying much more attention to the questions. Why don't we let you,
Yes,
mod-
I'm gonna turn to Aura and Gershon will get to you, but first we're gonna go to people who commented
We're just
earlier.
gonna, yeah, we're just gonna review some of the comments that came through in the chat, and then we'll go to the raised hands. There was a comment about, what about the people that apologize all the time? It doesn't mean anything if someone apologizes all the time.
There's a chapter in the book on race and gender. And I think that when people talk about apologizing all the time, they are often talking about women and people assigned female at birth. And I'm wary of the "you apologize too much" thing, because it's often one more way to police women's speech. That saying, okay, women are not supposed to use uptalk, which is when we end sentences in the upward inflection like that, even if it's not a question. We're not supposed to use vocal fry, which is what, younger generations do when they have that little bit of, like a fuzz in their voice. There are so many rules for how women are supposed to talk to sound authoritative. We're never going to sound like men. It's just not going to happen. And I worry that if we're policing women's apologies, then we are sometimes apologies are what we need to do to just get by in the world and get by in the workplace. Because if you don't apologize, particularly women of color who are not deemed sufficiently apologetic, who are deemed a bitch because they don't seem apologetic enough, the consequences can be really dire. So sometimes the advice not to apologize too much is good, depending on if you're coming off as cringing and, afraid. But I also wish that the default were to apologize more. So the thing about apologizing too much tends to sort of get my back up a little bit. However, we read a whole bunch of advice from career coaches, and the one thing that I really loved was, rather than saying to somebody at work, "Sorry to bother you," say, "Is now a good time?" Because you're not bothering them. You're getting the work, you're getting information that you need to do your job better and to make them look better. So I like that little bit of advice, but I'm often a little worried about, you apologize too much.
There's also a comment about that one needs to amend behavior and not do the same thing after apologizing.
Yes, absolutely. That was what we talked about with the dropping the reptile. I also like Gershon's point that apologizing too much is a trauma response, is that if we look at it from a kinder perspective, and actually at an event I did at a bookstore, an older woman talked about trying to mentor a younger woman who she worked with, and the woman just kept apologizing and apologizing and apologizing. But the older woman realized that when she was correcting the apologies, she was making the younger woman feel bad. And it was beyond her ability to cope with as a boss. If you're somebody who realizes that you're apologizing too much, I think that's a step that you can take privately.
You don't need someone to say to you, "Stop apologizing."
Yeah, how's that helpful?
Yeah.
Also, there's such a thing as a phatic apology, which is a linguistics term, which is an apology as a social act, like, "I'm sorry about the rain." You didn't make it rain. Just shut up. Also, I liked, what did you think about Netanyahu's apology the other day? Because I was very, I'm sorry, we couldn't save them. We almost did. Was very painful to hear. And then going on about how we're never going to, going on with the same justification, I don't think was a terribly genuine apology. And then I think about Hirsch's mother's apology. I'm going to cry now, but I'm thinking about Hirsch's mom's apology to him, where, you could feel the intensity of, I'm sorry that we failed you. But also thinking about what he said to her in the, when he was texting from the festival, saying, he said, "I'm sorry," because he knew how worried she would be, and he wasn't responsible for what happened to him, you know, so apologies they're so multifaceted. I mean, Susan and I have been writing about this topic since 2012, and I'm never going to be bored of it.
Could you comment on letting go of a hurt that the other person will not or ever apologize for?
There's certainly so much research on how, here, let me see if I can find my little forgiveness being good for your immune system, your blood pressure, your heart rate, your sleep. But that's if you can do it, you know, and I feel like it dovetails with the research on, you know, when years ago we were all supposed to be cancer warriors and we were all supposed to use that term. And, you know, if you weren't able to use your creative visualization and your positive force to defeat the evil forces of cancer, somehow it was a failure on your part. It's not, you know, sometimes A, some acts are unforgivable, and B, sometimes you can't do it. And if you can do it for you rather than for the other person, particularly if the other person isn't around for you to process with anymore, you know, the artist formerly known as Eve Ensler, who now goes by V, wrote a whole book about imagining an apology she got from her father, who was horribly abusive and is now dead. And for her, that was a really productive exercise. I can see how that might work for somebody. But I also feel like being angry at yourself for being unable to forgive is not productive.
Thank you. I think we'll go to the raised hands. Gershon, do you have a question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I was really interested in those bingo cards. Marjorie, reminds me of a book from, I think, 1964 by Irving Goffman called Interaction Ritual.
We got
where
some Goffman. We got some Goffman in this book too.
I'll bet.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he introduced a lot of these phrases as just part of the ritual. But the examples he gave were, you know, apologizing to your boss or to people who have power to fire you or whatever. And that's not what I'm about is, you know, part of that strategy. But I'm a former therapist, and I did my work in deep trauma with very poor people. And I can say that, you know, what I've observed is that a massive deficit in social learning about what an apology is for. You know, I've seen families and people who have never witnessed an apology repair a relationship in their lives. I was wondering if you could comment on that coarsening of our whatever it is we're doing.
You know, I feel like in some ways, social media has been incredibly toxic for people that, you know, it is designed, you know, for engagement, which just means making people angry and upset. But on the other hand, social media has also raised and amplified voices that were previously unheard. Without social media, you know, in the beginning, Rabbi Jason talked about he referred to this horrible incident on United Airlines where that elderly man was dragged off the flight despite having paid for his seat, and we saw him with his glasses askew and blood running down his face. And the amplifying of United's succession of horrific apologies was what ultimately, you know, made them have to pay a giant settlement to this man. And even as they were apologizing, they were being called out because they said that they reached out to him privately, and his daughter was like, no, they didn't. So I do think that there has been a coarsening of the discourse, as they say. But on the other hand, you know, if Plato was writing about apologies and bad apologies, and people have been worried about bad apologies since the beginning of recorded history. I mean, we've had duels over bad apologies. As you know, Susan is my co-author is inexplicably extremely interested in dueling, so there's a couple of mentions in there. But you also, Gershon, mentioned that, you know, you had people who'd never seen good apologies modeled for them who somehow were still able to do it. And I think that there is something that can be truly inspiring about people who just understand that they're willing to take this leap and be vulnerable and be authentic and do the terrifying thing, and people who are willing to listen when they do.
What is the timeline for time that has, well, let me just give you an idea. I have a friend, she's a friend of over 30 years. Her mother died. She felt I didn't give her enough support, and she wanted to take a break from the friendship. Well, I knew what that meant. And of course, I haven't heard from her since. I'm wondering if I apologized when I sent her a letter. My question is, what is the timeline for when you can finally just let it go? Because it still bothers me. We were very close, and I didn't quite understand how I didn't give her enough support, except for the fact that she lived across the country. That's my question. When do you reach a point?
Yeah. I hear two different things in what you're saying. One is, I miss her and I'm sad and I'm upset that we don't have this relationship anymore. And the other one is, Jesus Christ, what does she want from me? So if you decide that you want her in your life, I think you can apologize. You can, a letter is a good way to go, because you never want to have someone feel cornered by you when you apologize to them. When I was at Tablet, I once had to literally duck under someone and run to the bathroom to avoid him apologizing to me because I didn't want to hear it. So I would say a letter, but in that letter, you can't do the, you know, I tried, I did my best, Jesus Christ. It has to be, you know, I recognize how you feel here. Those 6.5 steps. If you just, I like actually often call Susan when I need to apologize and have her, and I start practicing on her, and she'll pull me back from the brink when I start getting into the step 4, you know, justifications. And or you can decide, you know what, this isn't worth it to me. You know, she will never forgive me, and I'm going to let it go. But those are your two options: a real apology that doesn't say but you, or the letting it go.
Marjorie, could I follow up? And thanks, Lori, for sharing that.
Yes, thank you.
Can you, if Lori were to write that or say something like that, or any of us in that kind of example, can you say, I miss you? Or is that
Yes.
entirely-
Oh, yes. Those words are so meaningful. And you know, I mean, that is about how you feel, but that could come in step 5, make it clear why what you did won't happen again, is I miss you so much and I want you back in my life. And I see that I really caused you pain, and I don't want to do that again.
Thanks, that's helpful, because I was wondering if it was.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Okay.
Yeah, and
just
Lori,
a
I'm
couple.
sorry, that sucks.
Why does an apology make a demand on the person who was hurt? Because I think you touched on this earlier a little bit.
Say it again.
Why
Sorry,
does
I
an
didn't hear.
apology? I'm sorry. Why does an apology make a demand on the person who was hurt? Apologize because it is the right thing to do, not as a demand for forgiveness.
Right. You know, we say forgiveness is a gift. Miss Manners would tell you can't ask for a gift. You know, there are these really charming signs that are in a lot of like little kid classrooms about how to apologize. And the thing that kills us every time is they always end with, will you forgive me? And we say, don't do that. Don't put the other person on the spot. You can say, I hope you'll forgive me, but you don't get to ask for that gift.
Judy Winters?
Yes, hi. I wanted to say something related to what Wally Siegel said, because I had a very similar situation with a friend complaining that I wasn't there enough for her when her mother died. And I want to say that sometimes people make demands that you don't think are appropriate. And I wouldn't apologize for that. I really feel I was there as much as, and I told her, she was working all day and I couldn't call her then. And I was working at night and, and I did what I could, but no, I don't think I did anything wrong. And this is somebody who often would find things to complain about, not just with me, but with other people.
Judy,
And,
you're making such a good point, and I'm so glad you brought this up, because a thing that we recognize in the bad celebrity apologies is when they do not think they did anything wrong and someone is making them apologize anyway, and that makes it a bad apology. If you're not sorry, do not apologize. And I'm not saying that you're wrong not to apologize. You probably are right not to apologize. But a bad apology is infinitely worse than no apology, because the words are going to start coming out that are like, that show that you're not really sorry. And again, in your case, I think you're probably, in this case with your friend, I think you're absolutely right not to say you're sorry. Because this is her MO, this is what she does. And, just opening that door is, you can offer her acts of kindness later, but the I'm sorry may be a door you don't want to open.
thank you.
Thank you. Yael?
Thank you. This may be a question or comment maybe for Rabbi Klein more, but I've never quite understood why we needed a special time in the year to do this. I mean, there's something strange. I always felt that there was something strange about, accumulating 11 months or so of items to then try to work out, within this 1 month. And I'm thinking that maybe, there's something culturally that is very specific about it, possibly, so that apologizing seems perhaps as something where we're giving something ourselves that we are not very comfortable giving. And I'm saying this because I'm thinking of, for example, other maybe Eastern cultures. So, for example, obvious one is Japanese culture, where apology is a virtue, that you experience all the time. And in the language, they have so many different words for different levels of apology. And of course, it's often accompanied with, physical gestures of, different levels of bowing and things like that. It's ingrained in the culture. And I think it feels very different for people when they do that. And then I'm also thinking of, for example, Vietnamese culture that I know a little bit about, where, we talked about the 6.5 steps, but actually, when I was thinking of Vietnamese culture, the first step is actually and that's where they spent most of the time before an apology. I've learned that at some point, is to speak of one's appreciation of the person that you're going to apologize to. So you spend a lot of time, kind of, they call it, flower watering, like watering the flowers of this person, right? They give a lot of appreciation and everything that this person means to you and have given to you. And that's where, 60% of the apology is. And then, there's the part of the apology. So I don't know. I'm just wondering about this kind of separating our year in that way and making this something somewhat unusual.
It's funny because sometimes we talk about how people that might not go to synagogue the rest of the year show up on Yom Kippur or show up on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, which is interesting, right? Like just to think about this, we have it among our sages, this Talmudic idea that somehow Teshuvah exists even before the world is created, that somehow in order to even have a world, there has to be a process of undoing wrongs that somehow undergirds even the creation of humanity. So that's intriguing to me. That I think some of you have heard me quote my rabbi from college who said, if people went to synagogue on Purim instead of Yom Kippur, maybe they would go back. But I think with even with Rabbi Shir's words, though, maybe there's something about the message of doing better. I mean, I think there's a lot of appeal in the message of being a better person. I mean, I think that moment of shame when we're called out for something that isn't representing the best of who we want to be, there is that moment of saying, oh, wait, like I do want to do better. I do want to suggest something historical, though, also, which is that today we sometimes forget that before there were terms like Yamim Noraim, high holidays, if you will, days of awe, that the whole holiday season began with Pesach and ended with Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, Simchat Torah. Well, I guess really Shmini Atzeret, it wasn't called Simchat Torah yet. Nor was Rosh Hashanah called Rosh Hashanah, but that was a day. So consider the idea that Yom Kippur is a step on the 6-month cycle of holidays in the harvest season, and that though one maybe not directly linked to the harvest, and that 5 days later is Sukkot, time of gathering our crops. We call it Zman Simchatenu, the time of our like utter happiness, and even the Torah calls it Hechag, like the holiday, as if it's to be the holiday to end all holidays. So I do wonder, maybe in that spirit of, forgive me, Marjorie, I'm sorry, not forgive me. I apologize. I'm about to use the F word, forgive. But what I want to get at is it possible that before something as incredible as this communal pilgrimage festival of the time of our happiness, the time where the Talmud talks about there never being such joy as the kind of joy you experience at the water pouring out festival and the temple, all these kinds of descriptions about the utter joy of Sukkot. Is it possible that that in order to feel like we can show up in the holiest place on the most incredible holiday, that somehow we need to clear our conscience first? I mean, I wonder if there's something about that. And I guess what I was saying about F word was, do we sort of feel like we need to forgive ourselves to be part of the collective? Margie, maybe you have some thoughts on that too, but.
I don't know, once upon a time, I think we lived in more community than we do now. So maybe my answer doesn't really make sense about why we have this one holiday. But I do think, as I said earlier, the power of sitting with all of these people who say we screwed up is a way to make it okay to have screwed up, and a way to open your heart to other people telling you they screwed up. I mentioned in the comments that Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg's book, one of the biggest story that I liked in the book was about Hualapai tribal judge in Arizona, who said when someone in his community commits a crime, they say he acts like he has no relatives. And that feels so Jewish to me. Like, we really do see ourselves as this community and family, or we try to. And I think reminding ourselves that we sit in community is a good way to remind ourselves that we have relatives, and that makes us accountable. I don't know.
You had talked
I
about.
feel like you're making a face.
Oh no, I was just going to say, you had talked about appreciating a shamnu and that kind of communal acrostic confession of sins. I noticed that there are some versions of the paragraph that introduces it that say, we are, surely we're not so insolent as to say that we haven't, that we're without sin. Rather, we have sinned. And some versions of it, aval anachnu chatanu, we have sinned. But some versions of it say, aval anachnu va'avotenu chatanu, we and our ancestors have sinned, which I think is also powerful. I mean, powerful that it's not just
Yeah.
horizontal, but vertical, but also powerful when we think about things like inherited privilege, racism, some of the things like that somehow we're not we're neither exempt from nor completely responsible like for the things we've inherited too. For me, that's also quite powerful.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, we'll take one more. I'm sorry, did you want to say something?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
As a teacher and
Yes.
as a parent, I keep thinking about how people say to young children, say you're sorry, say you're sorry. And you can see it in the kid's face. The kid's not sorry. They don't know why they're saying sorry. And I sort of wanted you to address that a little. That kind of nonsense about, having kids say they're sorry when they don't understand what they've done. Nobody's explaining what the issue is. They're just screaming, say you're sorry.
Yeah, kids deserve to understand why you're asking them to do something. That said, the way you learn how to tie your shoes is by tying your shoes and trying over and over and over again and having someone show you how to tie your shoes. So you do have to be saying, we all remember teaching the 2-year-old, how would you feel if someone bit you? So you do that stuff. And it's funny because Susan, who is from the Bay Area, that's the one thing that we differ on is I'm a lot more draconian about the making kids apologize thing. And it could be not again, I'll give you an example from Max, my younger one. They got into a yelling fight with a kid in 6th grade. The kid had called them a homophobic slur. And Max had responded, "Fuck you." Not okay. Also not okay to call my kid a faggot. And the teacher had this thing where everybody has to apologize, which I hate. But Max had to apologize. So what we came up with was, "I'm sorry for disrupting the class," which is not, "I'm sorry for saying fuck you," because they weren't. So I think there are situations in which you can say, is there something that you're sorry for in this scenario when your kid is older? Why do you think we're having this conversation? What do you think I'm upset about? There are a lot of ways around the subject of apologies, but I think when a kid is really, really little and you're teaching them what to do, you kind of have to say, I want you to say, "I'm sorry," because that's what we say when we're good people and we've hurt somebody else. And do they feel it? No. Is it sort of that ontology recapitulates phylogeny thing where you learn by doing? Maybe. I don't know. Parenting is just bushwhacking in the dark in general, I think. But my kids, I think, came out pretty great. Thank you, Gershon.
Hey, Judy, do we have time for one more question or not?
After we close the recording at 9 o'clock, stick around and we can take another question. Well, first let me say, before I draw the names, thank you to Rabbi Klein and Marjorie, a little show of appreciation for helping us really think about doing the work and trying to make ourselves and our relationships more authentic, and CBST a kinder community, hopefully along the way, and maybe even the world a tad better. So thank you both so much. And thanks everybody for your questions and comments. I think it was a rich discussion, and